Havana looks like it's frozen in time. Walk through the streets and you'll see bright 1950s American cars rolling past Spanish colonial buildings while music spills out of open windows. For a lot of visitors, it feels almost cinematic, like the city somehow skipped the last 60 years. But Havana wasn't always like that. In fact, for much of its history, Havana was one of the most important and wealthy cities in the Americas. To understand how that happened and why it changed, you have to start with geography. Havana sits at the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico, exactly where ships traveling between the Americas and Europe once needed to pass. During the Spanish colonial period, fleets carrying silver and gold from Mexico and South America gathered in Havana before crossing the Atlantic. That made the city enormously valuable. Spain fortified Havana heavily, building massive stone walls and fortresses to protect its treasure fleets. By the 1700s, it had become one of the most strategically important ports in the entire Spanish Empire. But that wealth also attracted attention. In 1762, during the 7 Years' War, the British briefly captured Havana after a massive naval assault. For nearly a year, the city became part of the British Empire, opening its ports to international trade. Although Spain regained control shortly afterward, the experience showed how valuable Havana could be as a commercial gateway. Over time, the city grew into a cultural crossroads. Spanish settlers mixed with African communities brought through the transatlantic slave trade. Later waves of migrants arrived from China, the Canary Islands, and other Caribbean territories. That blending created a unique cultural identity. Music styles like son cubano and later salsa grew from that mixture of African rhythms and Spanish melodies. Cuban cuisine reflects the same fusion: Spanish techniques, African ingredients, Caribbean flavors. By the early 20th century, Havana had become something else entirely: the Caribbean's entertainment capital. American tourists flocked to the city during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Casinos, nightclubs, and luxury hotels lined the waterfront. For many Americans during Prohibition, Havana was the closest place to experience nightlife that was illegal back home. But that booming tourism economy had a darker side. Organized crime groups from the United States invested heavily in casinos and hotels. Mob figures like Meyer Lansky became deeply involved in Havana's gambling industry. To some visitors, the city represented glamour. To many locals, it represented inequality. That tension set the stage for the Cuban Revolution. In 1959, Fidel Castro's revolutionary movement overthrew the government and radically transformed the country's political and economic system. Casinos were closed. Many foreign-owned businesses were nationalized, and relations with the United States deteriorated quickly. Then came the embargo. The economic restrictions placed on Cuba limited trade and access to many goods, including automobiles. As a result, many American cars imported before the revolution continued being used for decades, repaired, modified, and maintained with remarkable ingenuity. Those classic cars became symbols of Havana's unusual timeline. In many ways, the city stopped evolving at the same pace as its neighbors. But that doesn't mean Havana stood still culturally. Education, medicine, and arts remained strong parts of Cuban society. Musicians from Havana influenced global jazz and Latin music scenes. Cuban doctors became internationally respected for medical outreach programs abroad. And the city itself remained deeply creative. Artists, filmmakers, and writers continued producing work shaped by Havana's complex history, a mixture of resilience, nostalgia, and reinvention. Of course, Havana has its mysteries, too. One of the most debated historical mysteries involves the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor in 1898. The blast killed more than 250 American sailors and helped trigger the Spanish-American War. To this day, historians still debate what actually caused the explosion, An accident? Sabotage? Or something else entirely? The truth remains uncertain. So Havana isn't really frozen in time, it's layered in time. Spanish colonial walls, revolutionary slogans, American cars, African rhythms, Caribbean culture, all existing in the same streets. And that combination makes the city feel unlike almost anywhere else in the world. Because Havana didn't simply move forward through history, it carried much of its past along with it. Like and subscribe for more content like this.